Hi, this is Rose. As we celebrate Bill Hicks's 50th birthday, we're bringing you this great interview with the directors and producers of American, the Bill Hicks Story, also a great American comedian, Vince Fluck, and finally, Bill's brother, Steve Hicks, and it was such a privilege to interview him. Please note there's some sound variations in this interview, but they settle down. Enjoy it. Thanks. Hey, this is Rose. We're here at Bill Hicks' 50th birthday celebrations, and we've just seen some amazing raw footage, and I'm here with three pretty important people. So let's go. Let's start with the director.
Three pretty people, I would say.
Okay.
Look at that guy.
Well, I'm Paul Thomas.
Let's hear you introduce yourselves one by one.
I'm Paul Thomas, one of the producer-directors of American, the Bill Hicks Story.
I'm Matt Harlock. I'm the other one.
And we also have Vince with us, who's a US comic who's doing a tour around Europe.
Mostly in
Yeah,
Prague.
well, I'm Canadian, but I've lived a lot of my life in America. But yeah.
Okay, so
Here.
So the thing was that the first time I saw the Bill Hicks film was in Winchester, and I was absolutely amazed by it, as I was saying to you earlier, Vince, because his incredible social commentary, but also he seems to dig out from his own heart and place it out there, together with his incredible wit. But he's so funny.
Beyond funny.
He is.
He's just so real.
Yeah.
What is the amazing thing about Bill is his level of conscious presence in every second of every clip. He's never absent, you know. I've never seen him dial it in. He's always evolving his consciousness and what he's saying on stage. Not many comics ever do that. There's a slight margin that find their voice on that scale. And Bill's was transformational.
The interesting thing that Dwight, who was Bill's first comedy partner from the age of 13, said was that he saw Bill do material at a gig where the audience was not into it. It was not the kind of place that he should have been performing at. It was a kind of like a dinner and dance crowd, and he wasn't funny. He was doing like 45 minutes of stuff, which was basically, here's what I think, here's my opinion, and Dwight was like, wow, like he really hasn't got one laugh all night. What happened was that he saw him 6 months later. He had the same material, but he'd just put the punchlines in. He'd found where the laughs were in the material. So he hadn't changed his subject matter or his viewpoint. What he'd done was found a way to bring the audience with him on that journey, intellectual, comedic, whatever. And so Dwight was convinced that the gift that Bill had was to not just dismiss something that he thought wasn't funny because it wasn't working, was to find how to reach the audience with it, but without throwing away what he felt was important in terms of ideas. So Dwight was convinced that as a comedian, Bill was able to do that. It's a commitment, I guess, to not having to get laughs every night, that you are committed to getting the material the best it should be, and that might mean walking a room or two, which obviously Bill did.
What Vince said about Bill's presence on stage and always being very present is something that we really noticed making the film as well. You know, we had maybe 100 hours of unseen material that we went through. And what's really interesting about Bill is every show is different. But Bill described it was like doing jazz. And he knew his material inside out, but he would always try and do it live and in the moment, rather than just repeating, rehearsed routines. It was very important to him to be able to do it that way, and I think that's what's one of the things that really comes across to audiences is that authenticity, because Bill really is there in the moment. It's also interesting is the way that Bill is he's doing an act on stage. He's a larger version of himself, but the way he's managed to connect his stage act with who he really is as a person. And that's something he struggled with in his early years, to find out what sort of performer am I. And that's something where the alcohol years kind of helped him kind of shake off some of the kind of bonds and taboos that he was facing internally and really find himself as a performer.
That's quite interesting, isn't it? I was also really interested in that comment that you made about referring to the jazz, because when I saw the film, because obviously we're music side, but I can really see that comparison because jazz is so involved as a music form. And then what you've just said is you've basically said that he kind of played the long game on his comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I think that the thing that attracted him about the idea of jazz was that prescriptive forms that music takes are kind of what jazz attempts to throw off, and obviously you can go and hear some shit jazz, but when they get it right, there's a kind of there's a maelstrom of energy, which is a transference between the audience and the people who are making that noise, which bonds them together in an unspoken form of communication, which is very, very powerful because it's guttural, it's animalistic. And so, obviously with jazz, you have the beat and the rhythm. With comedy, I think Bill saw the ability to shape words not just into punchlines, but also into this kind of you can choose rhythms for the way that you deliver, which can bring people along with you. Even if they don't like the idea, they're caught up in the pattern. And that's really, really powerful, because you can suddenly give people a left turn when they weren't expecting it. And so you can choose the rhythm of your delivery. And I think that in terms of how Bill saw the common connection between jazz and comedy was that a comedian completely, as Paul says, in the moment, who's riffing, who's able to extemporize, not fall back on material, to go somewhere new, that's really, really powerful, because there's a friction, a tension, an atmosphere in the room that the audience and the performer both recognize and see. And that makes you feel like you're fucking alive.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Bill also had a great sense of alliteration. His choice.
A lot of alliteration.
Yeah, his choice of words, and the economical use of words to just hit the perfect timings. When watching those clips, it just blew me away how intuitive and instinctual it was, and then because you hear audio tapes of him all the time, and to see the actual footage is such a treat, because you get to see the full expression and body language that he exudes, it just effortless, and I see a lot of Jonathan Winter's facial expressions and his family faces with big fat pouty lips, and being able to purse his face, this is an extra level of heavy hammer comedy just in that alone, but all combined, man. The guy, I don't think there'll ever be anyone who touches that on that again, hopefully someone rips it with the truth and voice, because the world needs that, and Bill's kind of like a philosopher in a way, but as a musician, he had a musician soul, like an old black jazz man who grew up outside the bubble of contemporary society somehow. He had this old soul.
A lot of people who knew Bill very well, his friends, he had lifelong friends, 3 friends from the ages of sort of 8, 9, 10 through to when he died. One of them, particularly David Jondre, the photographer, described Bill as never looking the same way twice. And a lot of people describe Bill as having an old soul, is one way of saying it, but it was almost like a non-denominational soul. He wasn't young or old, he just was. And that's really interesting, because when you come across someone like that, it kind of gives you the sense that maybe there's something larger than that one single person going on at that moment. And so if people are inclined, as we are, to look for the spiritual, to look for the meaning outside of the corporal, Bill was someone who was able to connect you with that, because you kind of go, well, he doesn't sound like a 29-year-old Texan. He kind of sounds like a 75-year-old Chinese guy who's been sitting up a mountain. How?
Yeah.
And that leads you to believe that maybe there are things that are innate in the human soul which are not born from experience and background and upbringing. And that leads you into a very interesting spiritual area if you're inclined to search in that way, and obviously Bill was.
But that came out in the film. Definitely. I had a really strong sense of that. Because he kept going back, didn't he? He kept going back to not the desert, but the camp with his mates. I got the impression that he was really peaceful there.
I think the thing that we found from sort of seeing the performer, as Paul said, a performer on stage is connected if they're good and they're in the moment. They're connected to who they really are as a person. It's not a whole new iteration they come up with.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this notion that his friends had of who Bill was very, very different to the man on stage. So the tough, big, broad-shouldered Texan with the cigarettes and the swear words was not who Bill was like off stage, and I think we found that as filmmakers fascinating to explore what those interviewees had to say, because Bill was quite quiet and quite thoughtful and a listener, and wasn't, you know, ramming his opinions down your throat. He was kind of like, well, what do you think? And I think that that's something that the film hopefully tries to bring out, because any good performer is also informed by who they are off stage, and I think that that's something that Bill had as a very interesting aspect of his personality, was that he wasn't just that person on stage. He also was warm and inclusive and receptive, as well as wanting to put out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for anyone to have that level of like perspective and self-awareness, it takes an incredible like introversion and like reflection on life, which I think Bill had done from a very young age. Like from like as a kid, he was probably thinking of like, why am I here, you know, and like the deep philosophical thoughts that a lot of people don't come into much later in life.
So a great story that David Jondro, his friend, who talked a lot about spirituality with Bill when they were 15 or 16, was that Bill used to have this thing he used to drag around with him called the duffel bag of knowledge, which is basically a duffel bag full of books. And one day he kind of wasn't dragging the duffel bag of knowledge around anymore, and David said, well, where's the duffel bag of knowledge? He says, oh, I've read it. And so the idea that you are able to not learn by rote, but obviously Bill and David were interested in spirituality, but also in different religions. They talked a lot about the fact that they were brought up Southern Baptist, but had been able to take things from the Bible Bill had that David hadn't seen. I think it's really interesting, because a lot of us, particularly in the education system, are taught to remember and regurgitate, and Bill seemed to be able to transcend that in a very enlightening and engaging way, and I think that's why the interviewees, his friends, and particularly, were drawn to him, because he was someone who illuminated what the potential of the human condition could be, in a wonderful, funny, witty, warm way, with knob jokes.
It's something that we're in the film, and when interviewing people, we really try to find out, where did this guy come from, and was there a point when Bill was just a kid that you saw something special? And no one could really answer that question, and everyone just said he was always like that, he was always different, he always had that wisdom in him from a very, very young age, and that's what kind of attracted so many of these people. So many people we've met along the way have said Bill is my best friend, and this is kind of 30 or 40 people around the world, around the States, I guess, who kind of label Bill as the most important person they've ever met in their life. And it's just something that just seems to have been in him from the day he was born that made him very, very different.
He had a lot of insight, didn't he? Insight. He had so much insight.
He had a great intuition towards like the truths and the way the world works. Like it blows my mind. Like when he's going on his rants about like even that description of like the scatting in Rush Limbaugh's mouth, the way he breaks it down and actually fucking like exposes the freakiness of these people. Like there's just so much truth layered into that, And he wasn't afraid to call it, and I applaud him for that. Like, how many people would take on the industry and everything, and all, like at the core levels the way that he did, fearlessly, just constantly biting the hand that feeds him, like without any like fear of any repercussion. He just kept powering through, no matter what hits he took along the way. It was. Yeah, it's so tough to do that. This business will break like the even the best people, and he never got broken. He just kept. He had this deeper well of like inner strength, and it did inspire like a whole circuit and generation after him, And when you're talking about the Enlightenment, then when one person reaches a level of enlightenment in it spills off on other people, even if they haven't met him or heard his work yet. The fact that he put it out there, the next generation of comics came off the back of that, were deeply influenced by the impact he had made, whether they had known his work or not. And I'm like one of those. I just kept falling into Bill. Like I wasn't even consciously searching him out. It was like the biggest gift in my life to walk the steps through the places he had been inadvertently, and meeting the people that were close in his life, and it reinforced my worldview and like the things that society tries to beat out of you, you know, to know I had an ally in that way, and it's carried me through like some of the toughest challenges without even realizing it, you know, like that epitaph like on his funeral where he says, wherever there's laughter, love, and truth, where they abide, I will always be there in spirit. And he has been very soundly in spirit. He keeps coming in that, you know, like that blows my mind.
I think the thing that people ask about, the question people ask about Bill a lot is not why have we made the film. I think that he had a fascinating and interesting life, and that was obvious. But the point is, why does he seem to do things that other comedians can't? And I think that the answer seems to be that what is it? The phrase, Vince will know this. What's the phrase for a baseball player who can do everything? Is it a 5-point hitter?
A baseball player who which?
A baseball player who can do everything. He can throw, he can hit. Is it a 5-point hitter?
You know, being Canadian, I don't know all the.
Someone used a baseball phrase about Bill because basically he was not only
play every position.
Well, he was not only a student of comedy in that he studied like Chaplin and Keaton and the physical aspects, but he also was a great scholar of like how to write gags, what's a setup, what's a punchline, how does that work, and then he also was very much into the performance side, and the reason I think that people keep coming back to him is because not only was he able to deliver good gags, which many comedians can do, but he also had this spiritual higher calling to the way that he formulated what material he wanted to approach and why he went about it, which was that the anger that you see in him, I think, comes from a disappointment that the human race has been given this amazing gift called consciousness, which allows us to do all these wonderful things. And what we sometimes choose to do with it is use it to blow each other up and hate each other and divide each other. And so there are lots of comedians who tend to be described in the great sort of pantheon. Richard Pryor, Lenny Bruce, George Carlin and Bill tend to be the four names that come up again and again.
Yeah.
But I would say that Bill's quest for the understanding or deeper understanding of what a spiritual truth to a human soul means is why people come to tribute nights 15 years after he died, why his albums still sell more year on year. In the same, and it's not in the same way that other comedians connect. So I think that the big question about why people keep coming back to Bill and what is it that makes him so attractive, I think is to do with that deeper quest or calling to try and find out what it means to be human.
And strive for that oneness and interconnectivity of where we all are the same, like, life force. You know, like Bill, I think, saw that clearly. He didn't, like, put up artificial divides and constructs the way like a lot of people in society do. And it's interesting, he became very, very spiritual impact on almost like a Buddhistic, Taoist kind of like fractal of life, you know. Like,
fractal of life, that's a good one.
Yeah.
It's a good phrase. I'm going to use that in conversation later this evening.
All right, man. Yeah, go for it.
Sweet.
If it helps you pull
I
it
have
up,
fractal of life.
Fractal of life, ship it in, man.
You need to get past.
Yeah, I was going to wait to get a little talk.
I'm going to fall over in a minute. How are we doing?
I just want to know, but one last thing each. I ask you first, what do you like most about Bill Hicks?
It's such a big question. I mean, there are so many things, but I think that
One thing.
I think what I like most about him is his hope, and his hope is that we as a race can achieve more and do better and be nicer to each other and maybe even love each other and not blow each other up and not say fuck you because you happen to be black, white, yellow or whatever.
Yeah.
And so his hope translated into anger sometimes, frustration at the lack of progress, but at the same time it also manifested itself in transcendent, beautiful words and rhythms and language which transport people. That's a rare gift, and I think that being able to transport other people is something that comes along so rarely, and he was able to do it with a lightness and a deftness of touch and a warmth of spirit that draws people to him like a moth to a flame, you know, and it does still.
For me, I've done a lot of work with a lot of performers, and for Bill, it's just his transparency. It's just that he's able to perform to a packed auditorium of 3,000 people and yet still be totally himself, and that's something that's really hard to do, and I think he's one of the very few people that's ever nailed it.
Stays true.
To sum it up like that,
You like his black jackets?
yeah.
You can say that if you want.
I would have to say is truth, and the ability that he was able to like spell it out as just the ride that it is of life, and be able to like take the darkest subject matters where there's a deep like anger underneath, but make it fun. Like he never ever took it right over the cliff. Even when he was raging, he would always find the level of silly to bring it all back to it. It's just a joke. It's just life. You just gotta laugh at the things that frustrate you, you know. And then in that way, he became like a philosophical representation of like his generation, as much as a comedic. Yeah, like there's the depth of where his truths have like cut. Like there's, you could go through everything he said, and you can't find anything that has like fallen off is not true in like the decades and a half that's passed, you know. Like there's a certain timelessness, you know. And I like also the way that he inspired Carlin, you know. Like Carlin took an evolution into being an even greater comic than he had been his whole life after Kinison and Hicks kind of impacted the scene, and right around the same time period where Bill had his massive like coming together breakthroughs, you know, like where he just powered through like how many great albums in like a 2.5 year period.
Yeah.
Like, and if you look at Carlin's work from that point on too, you see his greatest time. So I think maybe the times defined him as well. Like Bill maybe saw society going over a cliff and felt a real purpose to say what needed to be said, because no one else was voicing it.
But I think the thing that really ties him and someone like Hunter S. Thompson together is that it really is once in a generation that a voice comes along which not only is able to have the understanding to prescribe and explain for other people a societal and cultural shift that's going on. So, for example, like Bill, the late 80s and early 90s was there when materialism really hit its peak, and then suddenly this wash back against it. But you have to be able to be unbeholden to a corporate structure. You can't be a film star, you can't be a sitcom star, you can't be a newsreader. You have to be on your own. And yet, you have to be able to broadcast what you're saying to a wide enough number of people for them to actually record it and understand that you said it. If I just say it now, no one's listening. But if he says it and he goes around saying it. So that set of rare circumstances, having the insight and the understanding, the position to be able to say it and yet the reach to have it recorded, happens once in a generation, if you're lucky. And Bill was the person who was there at the right place at the right time to go, no, you don't understand. Like 12 years of fundamentalist presidents, like with their finger on the button, they believe that the rapture is fucking coming, and they want it. That's not rational. And what we need to do is we need to move on and move past that and find a new way to understand how the human condition works that doesn't involve the three-party structure.
Yeah, he offered solutions sometimes like I thought were quite enlightening as well. You know, like, you know, there were simplifications. He didn't like get overly political. And the weird thing, in all his political expressions, he didn't like overly politicize himself.
No.
Like, does that make sense? You know, like,
Yeah, I know exactly. He kind of like kept it at the street level. He'd do all like this huge
Yeah.
stuff, but he just put it on the street and say,
Yeah.
you can pick it up as you go by, kind of thing.
yeah, put it on street level
Yeah.
is a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
You know, being able to relate to like everyone, even the people he's lampooning, like the right-wing Christian fundamentalists would have to listen to what he says and come to agreement. You know, like it's a gift
Yeah.
Extremely a gift.
I thank you for making the film because I was absolutely blown away and I wouldn't have known about him if it hadn't been for that. So I thank you guys.
Thank you for coming to see us.
Not at all.
Thank
great.
you. Cheers, Dan. See you later.
That's brilliant. The next bit of the interview is with Steve Hicks, Bill's brother. This was such a privilege. I know, God, you should see some of the places that I end up in. Well, you could imagine, I'm sure. And I'm going to get... Are you okay if I get the camera out as well? Steve. Is that okay? Camera too?
Okay, sure.
Yeah? Are you ready?
Absolutely.
Okay, so
Bring it on.
so this is Rose, and I'm here with Steve, and I feel really privileged to be with Steve actually because he's Bill Hicks's brother, and we were discussing earlier, and we were saying how we all know Bill a bit because of the film, and we don't know Steve, and I'm here really to ask Steve what he likes most about Bill Hicks, his brother.
Yeah, well, you know, I grew up with Bill, of course, don't want to state the obvious, but what he always was and always had was his integrity. And I think, my belief, and I've said this often, is that the reason that so many people around the world connect with Bill, it transcends the comedy anymore, is that I think they're seeing a person of the highest integrity that would have never sold out. He was honest and truthful with everybody. And I also think that his compassion and his heart shone through. And I got to see a lot of that when he played with my kids, his niece and nephew. And you know, a lot of other people didn't, but I think that came out on stage when you could just tell he was up there. And I think in one of his interviews he talked about, he just gets up there and it's as if he's talking to his friends. And so Alex, nice, I knew him. See, I remembered the name. Yeah, I think you could just tell that. And my belief is that that's what people connect with after all of these years. He was just such a genuine person, and something that is so rewarding to us still. And what I liked about Bill is that other people see that, and to this day, when I run across people that knew Bill, that had known Bill or met Bill, and there's not very many of them, but they all have to say how nice he was to them. I can tell you a story real quick that I think sort of sums it up. But I just recently met a guy, another comedian, and I'm not going to mention his name, but another comedian, and he was remembering with me how when he was just getting started in New York City, and he was a starving, you know, artist trying to make his way in comedy, and wasn't getting many gigs and wasn't getting much money. And by that time, Bill was sort of, you know, the center, you know, he was owning things at that point. I mean, the comedy, he was the, you know, probably 92 or 93 when Bill was big and all of that. And that when Bill would walk into a club in New York, when Bill was living there, he would walk past all these other big name New York comedians that had this little clique going on and were very arrogant and everything, and go right up to this guy and ask him how his comedy was. How was it going? Was he making progress? And so now here we are 20 years later, and that's the story that this guy wanted to make sure that I knew. People are sensing that in him, in his performances, and I can say that he genuinely was that kind of a person. And so I think that's something that I like about him, that makes me very proud. He was just a good guy, and that's what people see in him, I think.
It's very difficult to add to that because that does completely sum him up, because he had so much integrity, and I was really like you. I was really kind of thinking about, because it's difficult, isn't it? Because he's almost a satirist rather than a comedian.
Yeah.
Is that right or not?
Yeah, I mean, he always was a comedian, and he wanted to make people laugh. But I think in retrospect now, almost 20 years on, yes, that's what he was. That's what he's become. He had a way of seeing the bigger picture. You know, everybody references how amazing it is that certain things he was saying 20 years ago are still so relevant today. But I think that's what his gift was. You know, it was just something that, and I don't know how. I mean, when I hung out with him, which we did often, he wasn't a dumb guy, but he wasn't like he somehow tapped into that in his material, in his comedy material, and when he got up on stage, off stage, he was just a pretty normal guy. But yeah, somehow, it's transcended the comedy. I think satirists, I hear prophet a lot. Not sure what I think about that. That's sort of deifying him a little bit, and I don't know about that. But I see how people can say that, because I'm amazed at things he was saying 20 and 25 years ago are still very relevant today.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a certain vision and a gift and a mind to be able to have that view of the world, which he definitely did.
The other thing was that it's almost like he, in his work, he connected at a soul level. And then when I heard that he was a really, really good musician, I thought, okay, well that explains it, because that's what musicians
That's
do,
what they do,
isn't it?
Yeah.
But before that, I was completely confused by where this incredible, it's like a really deep connect, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
When we get...
And I got it when I heard he was a musician.
We get fan letters and emails from all over the world all the time, and they don't talk about anymore how funny they thought Bill was.
Yeah.
They talk about how Bill changed their lives.
Yeah.
And that's just gone so well beyond the comedy. Certainly he's funny.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in there watching the film now and everyone's laughing, when there's a joke. But I think that his message and it has really transcended that. It's very moving to hear from people how Bill changed their lives. And it's a common theme. We hear it all the time. Some of the people here today have come up to me and said that. So I think that Bill was just a good guy. I think that's what there is to like about him. He was a good guy that cared about people, and I think that is conveyed in his work.
Yeah. And as a result, he has a legacy, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.